Good morning, everybody. Who do we have that we need to add on to our prayer list? Nobody special? Nobody extra? That's a good thing. We are very happy and very blessed to see Edward and Jacqueline here this morning. Look forward to having them here a long time. So, would you go ahead, Edward? Amen. Thank you. Come on in and sit down. We've gone in and out of the weeds a lot so far, and we're going to continue. But as we go in and out of the weeds, what I don't want to do is I don't want to lose track of the forest, if you'll pardon my chasing over metaphors. We don't want to lose track of the fact that the purpose for this book was so that Isaiah would remind the Jews of what they should have known, what in all likelihood they probably did know, and what they still didn't follow. And I think there's an object lesson for us there as well. So Isaiah was ordained, for lack of a better word, directly by God to prophesy. And we saw that with the coals coming down and touching him. Again, that was the primary purpose for that. So we're going to go back into the weeds again today, and I just don't want you to lose track of that. And as we do this, I want you to remember the theme that I gave the study of Isaiah, and that is John 3:16 in its real context. And so let's get started. We're going to pick up in around verse 14 of chapter 7. And so we have a lot of the commentators that want to intertwine 7 and 8 together. I think mostly because if I had to guess, if I had to put out a cynical guess, it's because they're not willing to accept the virgin birth of Christ. There's some interesting parallels here. And again, I've said it before, we have to remember that these were written they were not written to us, they were written for us. So we have to understand why they were written to the people to whom they were written. And that helps us to understand some of the language and some of the parallels that go on in here. So we're going to pick up with this where in chapter 7, Clark supposes that it's Isaiah's son that is then being elaborated in 8. And I want to pick up, this is right after Ahaz refuses to give God a challenge, and Isaiah says, well, guess what? You're going to get proof anyway. Verse 13, then he said, listen now, O house of David, is it too slight a thing for you to try the patience of men that will try the patience of my God as well? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. He will eat curds and honey at the time. He knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. For before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose 2 kings you dread will be forsaken. The Lord will bring on you, on your people, and on your father's house such days as have never come since the day of Ephraim separated from Judah and the king of Assyria. And it will come about in that day that the Lord will whistle for the fly that is in the remotest part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And they will all come and settle on the steep ravines, on the ledges and the cliffs, on the thorns and the bushes, and all the watering places. And let's go ahead and add verse 20 to this. And in that day the Lord will shave with a razor, hired from regions beyond the Euphrates, that is the king of Assyria, the head of the hair of the legs, and it will also remove the beard. Okay. We see this Isaiah, again, requoted in Matthew 1, 22 through 25. And this is where we see this direct prophecy of the birth of Christ. It says, now, all this took place that was spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled, saying, Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which translates means God with us. And Joseph arose from his sleep, as did the angel, and did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, and took her as his wife, and kept her a virgin until she gave birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. Okay. Where some of the commentators run into an issue, and we're going to see this here, is that in this same time frame, Isaiah has another son. And so let's get into Isaiah and see the terminology that's used in there. We're going to jump back and forth in order to hopefully make this make sense. So let's go to verse 1, chapter 8. Then the Lord said to me, Take for yourself a large tablet and write on it in ordinary letters, Swift as the booty, speedy as the prey, and I will take to myself my faithful witnesses for testimony, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Yes. So I approached the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. Then the Lord said to me, Name him Maher-shalal-Hashbaz. For before the boy knows how to cry out, My father and my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. Okay. So this is where the commentators want to say that chapter 7 ties back to this verse. And some of it comes into our English because, well, let me back up a second. Let's define some more terms. The commentators agree, and it makes sense, that Isaiah was not just going to the temple and grabbing a woman that was doing prophesying and say, okay, you're going to have my kid, and bingo. In all likelihood, this was Isaiah's second wife, from whom he had refrained any contact, any sexual contact, up to this point. And so this term virgin simply means that it's not a miraculous birth like we see in Matthew, that it was just that she was kept separate from Isaiah. And the commentators agree that there's nothing miraculous about the birth of Isaiah's son. They all agree with that. So you have these parallel pictures that are being drawn. Now, when Isaiah talks about this time frame, before this son would be old enough to cry father and mother, you got to look back at history. So if you remember right, Isaiah, and I forgot to bring in one of my maps, but Isaiah was right around 620, if I remember right, 615, 620 BC, somewhere in that time frame. So I did a little research on the Assyrian Empire. In 722 BCE, thereabouts, Israel is conquered by Assyria. 705, Sennacherib moves the capital to Nineveh, which ties back into Jonah and his preaching. In 653, Egypt expels the Assyrians, and so now we're starting to get into the time of Isaiah. 648, a war between Assyria and the Elamites. 612, the downfall of the Assyrian Empire. So you're seeing the time frames right there alongside where Isaiah is talking about and his son being born. Now, in the interim here, Assyria does take over Judah after Isaiah's death. But this kind of helps you put all of those things in the timelines. And then in 115, the Roman Empire conquers Mesopotamia. And I think that's important in a little bit when we draw some more of the parallels. One of the things that comes into it is if both 7 and 8 do talk about Isaiah's son, then you have a change from Emmanuel to this huge name. Okay. Clark, wants to describe this as a change in the direction of the prophecy from one of hope and one of promise with Emmanuel to one of warning, one of a very dire warning, and hence the name change of his son. I kind of think that's probably what's going on here from that aspect. I don't think there's any question, though, that Isaiah is prophesying the birth of Christ, because when he confronts Ahaz, it doesn't make any sense for it to be just the prophecy of Isaiah's son, as a sign, as a warning to Ahaz not to challenge God that this is what's coming down the road. So that, to me, that's the only thing that makes sense from a whole contextual standpoint. Let's go really into the weeds here for a minute. Let's take a look at chapter 7, verse 15, if I've got my notes correct. Okay. He will eat curds and honey at a time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. For before the boy will know enough. Okay, now, who has a different translation there? Chapter 7, verse, right at the start of verse 16. It's translated for in mind. Does anybody have a different rendering? Before, okay, yeah. Okay. Clark makes an interesting argument. He contends that the Hebrew article in verse 15 that comes into this verse 15 and 16 should be rendered when and not for. So the passage reads, "Behold, this virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. Butter and honey shall he eat. When he will know how to refuse evil, he will choose good." Until, that's closer to the when, absolutely. Yeah. Which one do you have? Yeah, most of the older translations have that for or before. But it's an interesting contextual thing in there, and it does make sense when you read it, that when he will know how to refuse evil, he will choose good. And what did Christ do when he was confronted? When he was tempted by the devil, he knew the difference. He knew how to refuse evil and choose good. So, another part of why I think that chapter 7 is definitely talking about Christ. And then chapter 8 talks about Isaiah's son. If you look at it, and the reason that I brought up about the Assyrians and the Romans is that when the Romans threw out, or when the Romans conquered Mesopotamia and basically took over the world at that point, one of the things that they really put forward was this, if it's the right term, Pax Romana, peace, basically peace by force more than anything else. And so you would see this time that Isaiah is talking about, a time of honey and butter and honey, all of these things. And so this time frame, I would contend, describe the birth in the time of in the Maccabees, which would line up with the Roman Empire. That's my opinion. Nothing more than my opinion that I've concluded. You know what? I got contemplating, and if someone has a different reference or a different intake, please. But I got contemplating. Joseph and Mary were poor, most of the regular people were. But I don't remember any reference anywhere where they went without, that they didn't have enough food, that they didn't have enough clothing. They may not have had what they wanted, but they always had what they needed. If anybody knows of any study that shows different, please. I just couldn't find one. That would also fall in line with this peaceful time frame of when Christ was first born and a young child before he was old enough to cry mama and daddy. So, just some things to contemplate. Any comments before we go off into a really weird thing that's in here? All right. Verse 20. In that day the Lord will shave with the razor. Okay. How many of you have seen Eastern Orthodox Jews? Yes? No? I'm still asleep? What is one thing you notice about virtually every single Eastern Orthodox Jew? They have a long beard and something else too. They have the ringlets that come down the sides of their head. Yeah. That has a long, deep history, and it goes a long way back. Go to Leviticus 19:27. Do not cut the hair at the sides of your head or clip off the edges of your beard. So when you see an Eastern Orthodox Jew with the long ringlets and the long full beard, that's where it comes from. I thought it was fascinating when I got digging into it. Why don't we do that? Just a side note, why don't we worry about that? Thank you. Of course, the Eastern Orthodox Jews still believe the law of Moses is intact in its entirety. So, yeah. Okay. I'm sorry? He said because we're not under the law of Moses. Again, the Eastern Orthodox Jews do believe that the law of Moses is still fully intact. So that's why they practice this. So if we look at verse 20, what is Isaiah telling them? Why would this description be in there? Why would God threaten to cut the hair off the sides of their heads? Separation? Yeah. No doubt. I think there's something else going on in here that's just as important as the act of separation, at least the beginnings of that separation. Yeah. Let's see if I remember to write my notes. Yeah. Okay, let me read Clark while you guys think about this. And again, I look at Clark with a very jaded eye when it comes to the plan of salvation, but when it comes to history, I think he's done a very good job of documenting historical information. So he writes about this: shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired? Jehovah shall shave by the hired razor. To shave with a hired razor, the head, the feet, the beard, is an expression highly parabolical to note the utter devastation of the country from one end to the other, and the plundering of the people from the highest to the lowest by the Assyrians, whom God employed as his instrument to punish the Jews. Ahaz himself in the first place hired the king of Assyria to come help him against the Assyrians by a present made to him of all the treasures of the temple as well as his own. And God himself considered the great nations, whom he thus employed as his mercenaries, and paid them their wages. Thus he paid Nebuchadnezzar for his services against Tyre by the conquest of Egypt, The hairs of the head are those of the highest order in the state. Those of the feet or the lower parts are the common people, and the beard is the king, the high priest, the very supreme in dignity and majesty. Eastern people have always held the beard in the highest veneration and have been extremely jealous of its honor. To pluck a man's beard is an instance of the greatest indignity that can be offered. So what's God telling the Jews through Isaiah? Tough times are coming. But I think he's being a lot more blatant. I think he's saying, I'm going to humiliate you. Yeah. Part of your punishment is going to be humiliation because you've set yourself up on this high tower that you are God's people and you're going to be God's people on your terms. And God is saying, no, I'm going to show you again who's in charge. And the sad thing is, all throughout the Old Testament, you see time after time after time where God has to remind them that he's the one doing these things. He's in charge. And I'm going to go back to where I started this class. The Jews should have known it. In all likelihood, the Jews did know it, and they didn't pay attention. And the direct draw forward, the direct application is that we should know it, we probably do know it, and we don't listen. So. Comments? Okay. Any last comments about chapter 7? All right, let's get into chapter 8. This is some interesting language. And again, I had to do some research in order to figure out what was being talked about. So we'll start at the beginning of chapter 8. Then the Lord said to me, take for yourself a large tablet and write on it in ordinary letters, swift as the booty, speedy as the prey, and I will take myself faithful witnesses for testimony, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. Okay. What makes that important? Okay, God tells Isaiah to write these things on a scroll, which we'll get into that in a minute. But what makes verse 2 important? Sorry? Today, though, we use a notary. Isaiah didn't use a notary. He used notaries. Why is that important? Where does that come from? Where else do we see it? Yep. Jesus before the council. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. That's the only thing that was true out of all of this. But even the Sanhedrin was looking. Now, it's not that context, but, but it was true. So they had to find the 2 witnesses. I thought I had written down where that goes to. Okay. That goes, I apologize, I did not. Maybe I did. Where's my attached references? I thought I'd written down in the Old Testament where that part comes from, and apparently I did not, although I have a blue note here marked attached references. So I make myself notes that I don't follow. So. Okay. All right. So this scroll, when you hear the term a great scroll, what pictures in your mind? Because unless you're a really good Old Testament scholar, you probably are wrong, because I was. What do you picture? Blanks? This is where we interact. When I say a great scroll, what picture comes in your mind? Like a book, or yeah, or in the cartoons with the, yeah. Oh, I was surprised. Most women carried around a pocket mirror. So for all of you that are carrying around a pocket mirror, it's been going on for 2,500, 3,000 years, just so you know. But that pocket mirror was about the same size, and it was a highly polished piece of brass or bronze, depending on what they were able to put together. Polished to the point where they could see each other. Okay? That's not what this is. This is a piece identical to that, big enough that Isaiah could take an awl and scratch in these words. So, to me, it seems kind of unusual enough that they would have made something this big, because it was all done by hand. It would have been incredibly laborious. But what the commentators say is that this was a huge piece that was polished to that same level that Isaiah could write in. Why it required the witnesses? I guess, again, to support his prophecy, to support the fact that he was ordained by God to be a prophet. But nonetheless, that's what this picture really is. So then he approached the prophetess, again, most likely his wife, his second wife, with whom he had not been married very long, again, according to commentators, probably not been married very long, and with whom he had most likely not had sexual relationship with. And so that's where Isaiah's son comes from. And so then we get into this time frame where, because of Isaiah, God does not let the Assyrians take over Judah. Of course, that eventually goes away anyway after Isaiah dies, so we're going to get to that point. So, yeah.
I don't want to mess up your presentation here, but the reference to witnesses is in Deuteronomy.
Thank you.
19, verses 15 and following.
Deuteronomy 19. Let's go ahead and turn there. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know why I didn't write that down. And I have a strong feeling that my attached references is something that I left at home. You said 15, 4.
19 and 50. Chapter 19, verse 50.
Chapter 19. Yeah, that was a reference that I had, yep. Okay, it's now in the case of the manslayer who may flee there and live, when he kills his friend unintentionally, hating him not previously, as when a man goes to the forest with his friend to cut wood, and the iron head slips off the handle and strikes his friend so that he dies, lest the avenger of the blood pursue the manslayer in the heat of the anger. Did I miss the script? 1915. I didn't go quite far enough. Thank you. All right, so let's start at 14. You shall not move your neighbor's boundary mark, which the ancestors have set in your inheritance, which you shall inherit in the land of the Lord your God gives you to possess. A single witness shall not rise up against a man on account of any iniquity or any sin which he has committed. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed. Okay. So again, that's where that starts. Thank you. I got a feeling when I copied and pasted, it didn't copy and paste what I wanted to. Okay, so that's where this concept of 2 witnesses comes from. That's what Isaiah was dealing with when he had the 2 witnesses, and that's what the Sanhedrin was doing when they had to manufacture 2 witnesses against Christ. Okay, so why was Isaiah's wife called a prophetess? Let me rephrase that. Why do you think Isaiah's wife was called a prophetess? Maybe. Which is what I thought the same thing too. In that time frame, a lot of times the spouses took on honorary titles. Isaiah was a prophet, therefore Isaiah's wife was the prophetess, or the wife of the prophet. It's not, if you think about it, it's not really that uncommon of a practice for us today. But that's what most of the commentators believe, is that she could have actually prophesied. She could have been blessed by God to prophesy, but most likely it was simply because she was the wife of Isaiah. So, I'm going to read from Jamieson Fawcett Brown's Bible commentary. Prophetess, perhaps the same as the virgin in Isaiah 7:14. In the interim, married as Isaiah's second wife, this is in the primary and temporary sense. Emmanuel is even in this sense distinct from Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz. Thus, 19 months at least intervened from the prophecy, Isaiah 17:14, 9 before the birth of Emmanuel, 10 from the time to the birth of Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz, adding 11 or 12 months before the latter could cry, Father, Isaiah 8:4, we have about 3 years in all, agreeing with Isaiah. So this commentator suggests that Isaiah had 2 sons, and I don't think that's right. I think it's very clear that he's prophesying about Christ. But that goes back to the term virgin and the term prophetess. Okay, you see a different tone in 8. Again, in 7, there's talking about this hopeful time frame where Emmanuel is being prophesied, and there's going to be a time of butter and honey up to his time frame. But let's take a look at chapter 8 and see the difference in the tone. We're going to start in the same context. Starting with verse 4, for before the boy knows how to cry out, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. And again, the Lord spoke to me further, saying, inasmuch as these people have rejected the gently flowing waters of Shiloah, and rejoice in Rezin and the son of Remaliah, now therefore, behold, the Lord is about to bring on them the strong and abundant waters of the Euphrates. When you see that, what picture comes to mind? About to bring on them the strong and abundant waters of the Euphrates. Baton Rouge, 2016? Yeah. Even the king of Assyria in all his glory, and it will rise up over all its channels and go over all its banks. Okay, so that pretty much gives away. It's a flooding. Then it will sweep into Judah. It will overflow and pass through. It will reach even to the neck, and the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Be broken, O peoples, and be shattered, and give ear to all remote places of the earth. Gird yourselves, yet be shattered. Gird yourselves, yet be shattered. What's the importance of that? It's not that the editor missed a duplicate line here. What's the importance of that? Yeah. Isaiah repeats it because he wants them to pay attention to that. Devise a plan, but it will be thwarted. State a proposal, but it will not stand, for God is with us. For thus the Lord spoke to me with mighty power and instructed me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, you are not to say it is a conspiracy. Okay, I want to stop right there. Go over to 1 Peter 8:12. Come on now, I know I just stuck a piece. There it is. Nope, that's Matthew. Where's my note I made in 1 Peter? There is no 1 Peter 8:12. Hold on a second. I misread something here. Where's my... Aha. 1 Peter 3:14. I have no idea where I got 8:12 from 3:14. I'm going to start with 13. And who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled, but sanctify Christ as the Lord, ready to make a defense for everyone who asks you to give an account, and hope that is in you. Okay. So you're not to say it's a conspiracy in regard to all the people that call it a conspiracy, and you're not to fear. What's the point of tying these two passages together? Between Isaiah 8:12, actually it's 8:10, excuse me, 8:10. Devise a plan, but it will be thwarted. State a proposal, but it will not stand, for God is with us. Between 8:10 all the way through 8:12, and and 1 Peter 3:14. But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed, and do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled. Yep. Let's go back to the beginning of Isaiah. What is one of the primary themes of Isaiah's prophecy as a whole? Isn't it that God promises there will be a remnant? So, through the troubles, through the wars, through the attacks, through all of those things, God's remnant will survive to do God's will. And who is the remnant? Yeah. Yeah. We're that remnant. We're supposed to be that remnant. Yeah. I got the first half of the bell. And yes, all through the Old Testament, God directs towards the birth of Christ and his church and that remnant from the house of David. And it started with the covenant that he made with Abram. And from that time, he has always told about a remnant. The problem with the Jews is the Jews always believed that they could do what they wanted to do and that they would always be that remnant, always be that inheritance. And it's real clear in the time of all of these prophets, not just Isaiah, but all of the other minor prophets that we studied before this, that God was made it real clear to them. If you don't obey, you will not be part of that remnant. And so what we end up with is these prophecies that directly prophesy to the birth of Christ, Christ's sacrifice, blood sacrifice, so that our sins could be bought, so that we could become that remnant. So, any last comments? Yeah. Leather, bronze, yeah. Yeah, good point. I didn't catch that. That's a good point. Which may very well underscore why Isaiah repeated it. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Clayton, would you close?
Lord, our God and Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this opportunity we've had to study your word. We pray, Father, that you will guide our thoughts and help us to truly understand the meaning of Isaiah and all of the Old Testament so that we can better understand your love for us, your intended purpose for our salvation. We pray, Father, that you will guide our hearts and minds, help our parents to train their children in your word so that they will always keep their feet forward and facing heaven. We pray, Father, that each and every one of us will strive daily to do your will. Forgive us when we sin, keep us from sin, and help us, Father, to love one another, support one another, and help one another. This is our prayer in Jesus' name.
Thank you.